It was April 22nd, 1990. The sun was rising over Lagos, Nigeria, but in the presidential compound, chaos was breaking loose. Gunfire echoed through the corridors. Soldiers were turning against their own commander-in-chief. And in a moment of pure desperation, one man had to run for his life. Who was chasing him? Fellow soldiers. What did they want? His death. Would they succeed? This is the story of the coup that almost changed Nigeria forever. A coup led not by outsiders, but by military men from within. A coup that shocked a nation and exposed the cracks in the strongest military regime the country had ever known. At the center of it all was Ibrahim Babangida, a general who had seized power 5 years earlier, promising to save Nigeria. He was bold, intelligent, and ruthless. But on this April morning, none of those qualities could protect him from what was about to happen. This is not just a story about a military takeover. This is a story about betrayal, about how a leader's own soldiers turned against him, about how close Nigeria came to descending into complete darkness. And it all happened in just a few desperate hours. To understand why this coup happened, you need to know what Nigeria was like in 1990. 5 years earlier, in 1985, Ibrahim Babangida had taken power in a bloodless coup. He promised change. He promised reform. He said the military would fix what was broken in Nigeria. Corruption would end. The economy would improve. Democracy would return. But by 1990, none of those promises had come true. Instead, Babangida had introduced something called the Structural Adjustment Program. It was an economic policy designed to fix Nigeria's money problems, but it didn't fix anything. It made things worse, much worse. The program slashed government spending. It removed fuel subsidies. Prices skyrocketed. A loaf of bread became unaffordable. Medicines disappeared from hospitals. Schools couldn't pay teachers. The middle class was being squeezed into poverty. People were suffering, and they were angry. But there was something else brewing beneath the surface. Something more dangerous than public anger. Inside the military itself, frustration was building. Junior officers were questioning their leader. Some were openly criticizing Babangida. Some were even plotting against him. The military had split into factions. There were those who still believed in Babangida, and there were those who wanted him gone. One officer in particular was becoming increasingly dangerous. His name was Major Gideon Orkar. He was young, ambitious, and deeply troubled by what was happening to Nigeria. He watched the economic collapse. He saw the suffering of ordinary people. He watched the military leadership grow richer while soldiers went unpaid for months. For Gideon Orkar, something had to give, and he decided that something would be the removal of Ibrahim Babangida. In the weeks before April 1990, Orkar moved quietly. He spoke to officers he could trust. He recruited soldiers who shared his frustration. He wasn't working alone. There were perhaps a dozen officers involved in the plot, maybe more. They had a plan. It was bold and straightforward. On the morning of April 22nd, they would move against Babangida. They would seize the presidential compound. They would arrest the general and his closest advisors, and they would announce a new government. No bloodshed, no firing squads, just a military takeover, fast and clean. But plans rarely survive contact with reality. The conspirators made a critical mistake. They didn't act quickly enough. Someone leaked information about the coup. Not everything, but enough. Babangida's security team received warnings. Something was wrong. Something was coming. When dawn broke on April 22nd, the mood in the presidential compound was tense. Guards were alert. Babangida's advisors were nervous. Nobody knew exactly what was happening, but everybody sensed danger. Then came the gunfire. Soldiers appeared at the gates of the compound. Not guards, not security forces, but armed soldiers led by officers. They were moving toward the inner buildings, toward where Babangida was. What happened next was chaos. Some soldiers in the compound remained loyal to Babangida. They confronted the conspirators. Guns were drawn. Shots were fired. Suddenly, the military wasn't fighting an external enemy. The military was fighting itself. Inside the presidential residence, Babangida heard the commotion. He understood immediately. This was it. This was the coup he had feared. He had only minutes, perhaps only seconds. He moved quickly. There was no time to gather his things, no time to say goodbye to anyone. He left through a side entrance, protected by the handful of soldiers who remained loyal to him. Behind him, bullets were finding their mark. Outside, the fighting was spreading. Soldiers loyal to Orkar were fighting soldiers loyal to Babangida. The presidential compound was becoming a war zone. Babangida ran. He needed to get away from the compound, away from the capital, away from Orkar's reach. If the conspirators caught him, he was dead. He knew it. There would be no negotiation, no mercy. But where could he go? Lagos was Orkar's territory now. The capital was falling to the coup plotters. Babangida's loyal officers made a decision. They would take him to Dodan Barracks, the military headquarters on the outskirts of the city. It was a stronghold of loyalist troops. It was defensible. It was his best chance. The journey through Lagos that morning was terrifying. Streets that should have been calm were filled with gunfire. Military vehicles were moving in different directions. Nobody knew who was in control anymore. But Babangida made it. He reached Dodan Barracks, and when he arrived, something unexpected happened. The troops there held the line. The crucial moment came when Babangida's loyalists at Dodan Barracks refused to surrender. They had firepower, they had soldiers, they had organization. Orkar's forces tried to break through, but they couldn't. The battle for Dodan Barracks lasted for hours. Casualties mounted on both sides. The sound of heavy weapons echoed across Lagos. Meanwhile, senior military commanders who hadn't been part of the coup were mobilizing. They were shocked by what was happening. Some had been close to Orkar. Some had even sympathized with his criticisms of Babangida. But watching soldiers kill soldiers, watching the military tear itself apart, they made their choice. They sided with Babangida. More loyalist troops arrived at Dodan Barracks. The balance of power began to shift. Orkar's coup, which had started with surprise and initial momentum, was losing ground. By midday, it became clear to Orkar that his plan was failing. The compound hadn't fallen. Babangida hadn't been captured, and reinforcements were arriving. Orkar made a desperate choice. He went on national radio and announced the coup. He declared that Babangida was finished. He announced a new military council. He tried to make it official, to make it real through the power of broadcast. But by then, it was too late. His troops were being pushed back. Loyalist forces were retaking the city. By evening, the coup was over. Gideon Orkar and his fellow conspirators tried to flee. Some made it out of Lagos, some didn't. The hunt was on. Military and security forces swept through the city looking for the coup plotters. Within days, most of them were captured. Orkar himself was cornered in a hideout. He tried to resist, but he was outnumbered. He surrendered, knowing exactly what his fate would be. Nigeria's military courts moved quickly. Trials were brief. Justice was swift and absolute. On May 27, 1990, just over a month after the coup attempt, Gideon Orkar and 13 other conspirators were executed by firing squad. Babangida watched from his compound as the men who had tried to kill him faced the ultimate penalty. Other officers involved in the conspiracy were imprisoned. Some were dishonorably discharged from the military. The message was clear. Betrayal would not be tolerated. But the coup changed something in Babangida. He became more paranoid, more suspicious. He trusted fewer people. He moved faster to consolidate power. He also accelerated his plans for political transition, though never in the ways he had promised. He would eventually hand power back to civilians in 1993. But only after manipulating elections and maintaining control behind the scenes. Today, the coup that almost killed Ibrahim Babangida is remembered as a turning point in modern Nigerian history. It proved that even the strongest military regimes are fragile. It showed that you cannot hold power through force alone. You cannot ignore the suffering of your people. You cannot neglect the needs of your own soldiers. The coup also revealed something about military culture in Nigeria. It exposed how deep the frustrations ran, how many officers saw their leader not as a protector but as a problem. For Nigeria itself, the coup attempt was a reminder of how close the country had come to deeper chaos. If Orkar had succeeded, if Babangida had been killed, Nigeria's military government might have fractured completely. A second coup could have led to a third to a fourth. The country could have descended into complete instability. Instead, Babangida survived, and because he survived, he maintained enough control to eventually hand over power, however imperfectly. But the scars remained. The conspiracy planted seeds of doubt in the military leadership. It weakened their confidence, and it accelerated the shift toward civilian rule that Nigeria desperately needed. Today, as Nigeria struggles with its own challenges, the lesson of this coup still echoes. Power gained by force is power that can be taken by force. Leaders who ignore their people, who ignore their own followers, are building a house on sand. On April 22, 1990, a general ran for his life through the streets of Lagos. Bullets chased him. Soldiers hunted him. For a few desperate hours, the fate of a nation hung in the balance. He lived. His rivals died. But the real question isn't whether Ibrahim Babangida survived. The real question is what his survival cost Nigeria, and whether a military leader who had to flee for his life could ever truly be trusted to lead again. History would answer that question in the years that followed. But for now, what remains is the memory of the morning when military power crumbled, when the strongest seemed weakest, and when one man's ambition nearly brought down a general.